Pauline is a victim of domestic violence. Her husband hit her, injured her, and kicked her out of the marital home with her 2 children. We are in Lomé, capital of Togo.
The
various initiatives undertaken by the Togolese government in the fight against gender-based violence have enabled, among other things, a change in behavior in relation to intolerance towards acts of violence in the communities. The reporting and denunciation of cases of gender-based violence, the conviction of the perpetrators of violence, and also the adoption and revision of several laws such as the Code of Persons and the Family, the Penal Code, the Code of the Child, and the Land Code.
Gender-based violence is everywhere in Togo. There is really no geographic or age specification. They don't really spare anyone. They exist in all social strata and are generally directed towards women. One of the most serious cases was where I received a 2-year-old girl who was raped by an adult who left her in ruins. She lost 2 children because the man was so violent that he also used his violence on his children, who died as a result.
The distinguished representative of Togo.
Yet the country guarantees equality before the law in its constitution and has made international commitments against gender discrimination. But in Togo, women and girls are still victims of all kinds of violence: domestic, sexual, economic, psychological violence, both in the family and in the community.
I tried to live a life with a man. 6 months later, he joined a church and insisted that I too join that church. He told me that if I refused to join, he was going to divorce me. One day, in the church, we were told that once we enter the church, we must burn everything that we have on earth. Because with the prayers of the church, God will give us new things. I was a seamstress, and my machines, loincloths, and all of my household items were burnt. I was in 3rd grade, and I lived with my mom. She married a man and had a child with him. One Sunday, my little brother was sleeping. My mother's husband told me to take him to the bedroom. But as I was putting my brother in bed, he threw himself on me and raped me. He told me that if I ever told my mom about it, he would kill me. So I did not tell my mom. We had 2 children, and a few years later, he kicked me out of the house. At that moment, I noticed that I had another pregnancy for a 3rd child. He was so violent with me that I couldn't live with him anymore. The 3rd pregnancy has progressed, but he said he was not the father.
The socio-cultural pressure is so intense that the Togolese woman victim of violence often thinks that it is her fault and that her husband may be right to punish her. If we add to this a social system and a legal environment entirely dominated by men, we can get an idea of the hell that Togolese women and girls go through who are victims of gender-based violence.
Once my belongings were burnt, and my husband had no source of income, I decided to go find work. But when I found a job, he forbade me, saying that in their church, no one should work. The following Sunday, we went back to his house, and he had done it again. He is no longer afraid of anything. I was sleeping on the floor, and in the night, I felt he took off my pants. But I couldn't say anything.
Efforts deserve to be pursued anyway in raising awareness of magistrates, judicial police officers, and traditional and religious authorities.
Dr. Avidia Fakofi Vovaliti, who is also a traditional chief, is at the crossroads and trends in efforts against gender-based violence. Just last week, I had to deal with a problem with witchcraft. And most of the time, it is women who are accused of witchcraft. There have even been murders of women beaten to death. As a doctor, he criticizes certain cultural, religious, and even legal practices that do not promote the fight against gender-based violence in Togo. In the texts, there are provisions which mean that we can, at any given moment, let certain early marriages pass. Now we are working on it, advocating for the law to be clearer. No early marriage. You need to come of age first before you get married. The victims die in their hearts every day, and their cries are imperceptible. These silent cries, the government and the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA Togo, have perceived them and have put into place mechanisms to fight against violence against women and girls in order to get survivors out of the moral and social abyss where they are locked up and thus slow down the development of the phenomenon.
The actions of the ministry revolve around three acts: prevention, care for victims of gender-based violence, and coordination of actions across the country.
Thus, with the financial support of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, the Togolese government has built several listening centers and redeveloped buildings to make them listening and counseling centers on gender-based violence. And Pauline and several other women survivors of violence go to listening centers where attentive ears await them, such as here at the Novisi Listening Center in Lomé. Here, too, at the GF2D Center in Lomé, this woman came to ask for assistance against the verbal and moral violence inflicted on her by her husband, which also prevented her from seeing her children. She decided to take the case to court with the assistance of the center. However, in Togo, there is a clear desire in several ministerial departments to join in the fight against gender-based violence in the country.
We believe that sports today is positioned as the miracle cure for all the ills of our society, and for that, sports as vector of social cohesion, vector of living together, can be a very visible weapon against gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is a priority for the Togolese government, and the Togolese government, through its 2025 roadmap, has put in place strategies and policies to ensure that gender-based violence is well addressed at school and in the community in general.
The United Nations Population Fund in Togo, UNFPA, leads a number of consultation and discussion frameworks on gender to support the government in its efforts to reduce the incidence of sexual violence. UNFPA has also been leading for some time the group of technical and financial partners active in the fight against gender-based violence in Togo. This is how UNFPA, within the framework of its mandate and its action in Togo, is considering the establishment of a holistic management of gender-based violence. One of the places where girls and young girls who are victims of sexual violence can find warm comfort and excellent care is the Kekili Center in Lomé. In this child protection center, we take care of child survivors of sexual abuse, child victims of internal mobility, and child victims of trafficking. In the Muslim community, we have a document on Islamic arguments that fight against gender-based violence. We also had to train certain religious leaders, some imams, on the subject. Psychologists are of paramount importance in the care of victims. It happens that we see people who have dark thoughts, thoughts of suicide, and who have even tried to kill themselves. In this case, the emergency is psychological. The COVID-19 pandemic and the health crisis it has engendered have caused a significant decline in countries around the world on all fronts. Togo has not been spared, and its efforts to combat gender-based violence have been seriously compromised and jeopardized by the management of the pandemic.
During the pandemic, the ministry, with the support of technical and financial partners and especially UNFPA, reinforced the security system of the agents of the listening centers by the provision of hand-washing device kits and protective equipment. This made it possible to ensure continuous service for the benefit of the communities.
For its part, UNFPA is convinced that only a multi-actor mobilization will make it possible to effectively deal with gender-based violence in this period of pandemic. Already, as part of its mandate, UNFPA is working with civil society and has adopted a community approach in the strategy referred to as Papa's Champions and Mothers Clubs. Here, outside Lomé, 30 kilometers from the capital, is the village of Dimimi. It is a community united around a system of perfect cohesion, which faces the problems of society and sexual violence. Papa's Champions and Mothers Clubs are at work.
We hope that with the various partners, we will really make a difference.
UNFPA's efforts, alongside the government in the fight against gender-based violence in Togo, will breathe new life into the fight and lead to a real social interaction of survivors. They will have another look at society and their own future. As Afi says so well,
I thought it was the end of the world, but I was wrong. There is hope.
yes, there is hope.